Welcome to the Pull Up a Chair show. I'm Dr. Krysti Wick.
And I'm Dr. Jake Greenacher.
And we are here to let you in on our in-depth conversations on chiropractic practice, personal development, leadership, and business excellence.
If you are needing inspiration, motivation, clarity, or permission in any of these areas of your life, we're glad you're here. Pull up a chair.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Pull Up a Chair. I'm Dr. Krysti Wick.
And I'm Dr. Jake Greenacher.
And it is Friday today while we were recording this. And so it's casual Friday for us. And so we wanted to talk to you actually very specifically about that and, kind of choosing your hours and figuring out the best plan for you when it comes to being in the office and your time to work on the office. Because really, we can break that up into multiple different thought processes depending on where you are in the trajectory of your practice. And both of us have done probably every iteration of hours you can think of. And so we are going to look back with our 2020 hindsight and obviously our experience in coaching hundreds of other docs through this as well. And just give you some things to think about when you're setting your hours so that they not only fit your ability to grow your practice, but they fit your ability to live your life, because that is really important as well.
100%. And I love how you said that, Krysti, is that we're mostly teaching, like always, from scar tissue, right? We've done every iteration. We're still changing it now. We see things that worked really well and things that haven't. And ultimately, what we want to give you is some lenses to look through, some stages of where you're at, to start making some educated decisions for you. It's not like we're going to say, this is what you have to do. It's like, here's what to think of. If you're in a startup stage, here's the things you have to consider in startup. If you're in a mid-stage growth phase, here's what to think of. If you now are in scaling and CEO, there's different things to think of. So it's not to necessarily say like, here's a printout of exactly what your hours should be, but there is some things that you should look at and consider as you're in each one of these phases of growth.
So to start with, if you are a startup and you are, starting your practice fresh from scratch, and let's just say you are not, moving some patient base over. Let's say you're literally just starting from scratch. You're going to go knock on doors and do talks and the whole shebang. I think the most common mistake that startups make when you set your hours is listening to like your Uncle Ken, who has no business experience, telling you that you need to be accessible. And so you need to be open every hour of the day, because if someone calls, you have to answer and you have to be ready to take that walk-in new patient. That is terrible business advice. Don't do that. Uncle Ken doesn't know what he's talking about. And what we would tell you is you have to be very strategic about how many hours you're in the office. And of course, yes, you do have to be available, but being open, quote unquote, for patients Monday through Friday, all day long, is one of the worst possible things you could do as a startup, because it honestly leaves you putting patients all over the place. And you end up having all kinds of weird chunks of time where you actually can't get the important things done when you're a startup, which is, the marketing and working on your business so that you can gain momentum. So we're big proponents of choosing some concentrated time. So I've seen a lot of docs be really successful with picking 3 full days a week that they're open, staying open until 6 p.m. That is one thing as a chiropractor, regardless of where you are, especially if you want to be in family practice, that 5 to 6 p.m. hour is always going to be the busiest for your practice. And so starting with that and making sure that you have options for people after they're done with work, after they're done with extracurriculars, all of that. But I have seen a lot of people be very successful with that three-day a week schedule. And I can tell you from personal experience, I started having tons of hours. I continue to scale back to 3 full days. And I was able to continue that 3 full day, with patient care schedule for a really long time, until a very high volume personally before I started hiring associates. So it can be very efficient. It can also help you just give you those additional days where you have 1 day to work on your own things for your life, and you have 1 full day to work on the marketing and what needs to happen to grow the practice.
I love that, Krysti. I think that the thing to think about, or to key into your own mind here, is that you need time to be out shaking hands and kissing babies, right? You need time to be working on those things. And there's no better time in the world to be able to do that now because of technology, right? Call forwarding to your cell phone. Like you said, you don't have to be there all the time. You can text from your phone, depending on what EHR software you have. And you can get all of this stuff when you're not physically in the office, or a staff person can be monitoring it or whatever. Another option is if you consolidate. Maybe you're there like 8 to 9:30, and then you're back again from 4 to 6. And that middle time is you're out doing all of those things that are important. The bottom line is not to schedule yourself too much time or in the office, because you end up, like Krysti said, spreading out those patient visits. It doesn't allow you to do anything else. And also it creates a feeling of being busy during those times, right? I think one of the things that we have heard years ago, and I want to bring this up because I haven't heard it for a while, is that when you cluster book or you're booking more people at once, they come to a place with energy. You're delivering better adjustments. The energy in the office is better. All that is good. You may think you have time for people if you schedule them out further. Oh, I have one every 15 minutes or one every half hour. Not only does that ruin your ability to actually get anything else done, but people are going to walk in and look around like, what's wrong? Like, there's nobody else in here. Like, if you ever walked into a restaurant, no one else is there, you wouldn't think, wow, they're here just for me. You'd think there was a rat in the kitchen or something. So just kind of consider that as you're thinking about it. You want to create the feeling of looking busy. So make sure you consolidate those hours, give yourself time to be outside doing what needs to be done.
And before we move on to kind of the mid phase of growth, the other really important thing for cluster booking, which needs to happen as you continue to scale, until you're completely booked from, the time you get there to the time you leave, you really should work with your CAs, make sure you're cluster booking. And when you're a startup, you also need to be really conscious of how much time you are spending with your patients. So the amount of time that you are face-to-face with them, you're working on them, because I've seen this over and over again as well with startups. If, you are only seeing 40 a week, well, then you feel like you have time to spend 20 minutes with a patient, but maybe your goal is to see 250 a week by yourself. Guess what? When you want to see 250 a week, you're not going to have the time to spend 20 minutes per patient. And so if you start that habit now, not only are you setting yourself up for failure to scale, you're also creating an issue that you need to deal with when it comes to the patients that have been with you from the start. As you continue to decrease that time, it's going to be harder and harder for you to maintain retention, because patients have now, they understand the time is what they're paying for instead of the quality of the adjustment, your expertise, which, if you're adjusting your family member, it takes a very short period of time. And so you want to try to keep it as close to that as possible. So that's a little sidebar that's really important for you if you're a startup.
Another sidebar about that, and this is at any stage, one thing Krysti and I, like she said, I've coached a lot of chiropractors for a number of years. The biggest thing that we see is too much time in the new patients or the reports as well. It breaks our heart. We talk to doctors who are like, I can't see any more new patients. Or we have a 3-week waiting list, which on its face may look really good, right? And if you are bursting at the seams and seeing 800 a week and all of those kind of things, you may actually have that physical limitation. But if you are not there, what usually it is you are not efficient enough at those appointments, so you don't have time to fit them into your schedule. So make sure you're working on that now. Now you might, if you're in this stage, you may have an hour to spend with each new patient report, but make sure you're working on what should this look like when we're at where we want to be. So sidebar there as well.
Yeah. Okay. So moving into, we don't have a great word for this. We're going to call it the middle, the middle between startup and seasoned, where, we're going to call seasoned if you are hiring other docs, if you have a larger team, et cetera. So if you're just chugging along, you're in that mid zone, you have a good patient base. I would say at this point, you're probably hopefully seeing, 100, 125 a week or more, and growing actively. You're still doing a lot of marketing. This is probably the most tricky spot for us to give you really direct guardrails, if you will, because it depends on your staff. It depends a lot on your efficiency, their efficiency, and so many factors when it comes to your life. So, obviously, let's say you are a mom and, you have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. How we are going to advise you as far as, what is important to you and how you divide your time might be a little different than if your kids are 15 and 17 and, more autonomous and whatnot. So there's a lot of factors to consider with this middle of the road. I would say the biggest first thing to ask yourself is just, how do you feel about your current hours, and what is your reaction to those hours telling you? So when you get home at the end of a day or a shift or whatever you're doing right now, Are you completely drained, or do you feel like you have a little bit more in the tank? And honestly, if you don't have those moments throughout your week where you feel like you can tackle some important projects to move things forward, then your hours probably do need to shift and they need to tighten up. And that's the most common mistake that we see in this middle of the road zone is people feel like they are hitting a ceiling, if you will, with their efficiency when it comes to their visits. And so the thought process of like removing a shift to give themselves more breathing room is oftentimes something that a lot of our clients are very resistant to. But the problem is, if you don't continue to challenge yourself to be more efficient at each level, then it will be hard for you to scale. And so you have to create oftentimes some pressure, if you will, in order to test yourself and figure out how you can be more efficient when you are seeing patients, so that as you are in this middle zone, you can carve out some additional time to, honestly, first and foremost, like rest, be able to, remove yourself from that constant service. But also, this is where the innovation, whereas that startup phase, you're out there, lots of just face to face. When you're in this middle zone, it requires a lot more brain power of just what's going to get me to the next level. How do I innovate and figure out exactly what's going to work for my community, for my personality, for what has worked well for me for marketing. So if you don't have space in your schedule to do those things, it's going to be really hard for your business to grow.
Yeah. And one of the things where Krysti and I are very different in our consulting and what we do is when people are in this phase, the thing that we spend the most time is talking with people is what ultimately is your goal? Like, what do you want? What does ideal look like for you? Paint us a picture of what that looks like for you. And I love that example you use, Krysti. Let's say you're a mom, you have 3 young kids, and you're like, you know what? This is what I want to get to. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like Krysti exactly said, let's tighten it up. Let's create ultimate efficiency. Let's get you less hours and maximize your profitability, right? How can we crank up that profitability so you are so profitable right here, right? If you are someone who wants to hire more team and more doctors and do that, you're going to have to push through this messy middle, right? It's not that you don't have to be efficient. It's not that you don't have to do all of those things to tighten up, but you're going to have to push through until you can get that to hire on those docs, right? Because in that next stage, you're going to need more availability for people because you have more people you're seeing, right? So that's going to come with that next part. So if you're in that stage, in this messy middle, the biggest thing we talk about is what are your goals? Like ultimately, where do you want to get to? What do you want to make? What do you want to have? Because if this is like, you know what, I'm almost seeing where I want to see and the hours, are almost where I want to be, almost too much. Cool. Let's really tighten it up, tighten down your hours, tighten up your efficiency, maximize your profitability, or are you looking to get to that bigger team area? Then there's exactly those same concepts of tighten it up, get more efficient, but you may have to be in push through mode a little bit because you want to go somewhere else than where you're currently at.
Another important piece of this phase is to really start just looking at where you are spending your time out, like in addition to patient care. So what are things that you can start to delegate now that you're having some more cash flow and you have options to not be doing, a lot of the things yourself as you were when you were in that startup phase. And this is another area where docs really struggle because oftentimes what will keep you in this middle zone for too long is hoarding tasks, like literally just holding on to them and feeling like no one else is going to do them like you will. And you're worried, you have, anxiety of whether or not it's going to get done properly. Basically, if you're a type A, if you're a perfectionist, you're going to hoard tasks. And so this is a huge part of being stuck in this mid zone for way too long, because you refuse to delegate, you refuse to invest in your business and hire on the right people that are going to help you. And you refuse to tighten up your hours and make yourself more efficient. And so you just kind of ride this hamster wheel over and over again, and you don't know why you can't break through. Those are some of the most common reasons that we see. So when setting your hours, if you're in this mid zone, let's say, I'm going to just pull some numbers for sake of reference. Like if you're seeing 100 a week to 300 a week and you're a solo doc, we'll call that the middle, if you will. Really setting your hours needs to be very dependent on making you as ruthlessly efficient as possible. And getting you to those goals that Dr. Jake was mentioning, so that you are making decisions based on what you want, what done looks like for your practice, and you're catering all of the things that are happening with your team members to their strengths as well. Because when you're really thoughtful about who's doing what, it's going to make this phase short. If you
Yep.
if you spend the time to really do it right, you can bust right through it pretty quickly.
Awesome. That last stage we're going to talk about is when we get into that like big team. Do we have another name for this? I feel like we don't have a great name for this either. Like multiple docs, bigger team,
Maybe
scaling,
mature practice.
mature. There we go. Mature. That's great. That's a great way to put it. Because the next thing becomes in this is, okay, now what does it look like? Right. And this may be very different for, again, multiple people. What are you looking at? What is your goals? What other stuff do you have going on in your life? You may have other adventures you're big on. You may be, want to key into more family time, or you may be more in the office. And this is something where Krysti and I have had so many iterations in the last year. Krysti and I have had about 4 iterations of this, right? We've been almost full-time in the office. We've been very little in the office, and you have to find what works best for your team. The big thing I would stress in this phase is it's all about pouring into team, right? You have to build up associates. You have to build up leaders in your practice. You have to build up CAs. You have to do all of these kind of things in your practice. So you need the time and space and bandwidth to be able to do that. That CEO time, which is so overused and just a word that sometimes it's been so overused so long that it just kind of makes my skin curl a little bit. You need the mental freedom to be able to do all of these things. So what does it look like? And I'm going to give you an example of me, and Krysti can add in here as well. So as we were building kind of team back up, I first looked at the office. Okay. I looked down like a 30,000 square foot view at the office. When are our busiest times, right? Because I'm in a season of my life where, I got kids in school. I'm not on a beach like 3 weeks at a time. Like I'm in town, right? So when I look at it, I'm like, I'm usually working on one of our businesses all the time, right? So if I look down a 30,000 square foot view on our practice, where are our really big bottlenecks, busy times, right? And for us, it's that first hour of the day and anything after school and beyond. So for me, where I plugged myself back in is the times that I was needed the most as a practitioner back in, and I took all the other time to do that outside. So again, just a practical example for me. I come in, I kick off the team meeting, I'm there for that first rush of the day, and then I'm gone, right? And then I do everything I need to, calls, marketing, this, Krysti and I, we're doing this, right? All these other things we have going on. And then I'm back in the office for that end of school kind of shift. I've had days where I haven't been in full days in the office. I've had many iterations. This is where you really kind of get creative with architecture of your life and your practice. But it's the idea of having enough space to get done what you need to get done.
Yeah. And I think, again, just going back to what he's just touching on, it's the biggest thing I think for this mature phase is you coming to terms with the fact that your schedule likely is going to ebb and flow, and it's going to evolve as your team evolves. So one of the first things you really have to learn and just embrace is your team dynamic it's like a living, breathing organism.
Yep.
And so it is going to consistently evolve. And so you being the leader of the team and, oftentimes a big part of the training of multiple different, players on your team, you have to be willing to look at what's needed when it comes to the team as that living, breathing organism right now. And, in my experience, it's usually like in 90-day chunks. So it's like for this 90 days, what is required of me as a leader in order to not only make sure the practice has what it needs, but make sure my team have what they need to continue to level up and, step into their potential. And a huge part for me as a leader is I'm also always looking at their burnout as well. What's their capacity, if you will. And it's a tricky dance. And this is something that I definitely got wrong in the past. And I overestimated and I tend to be that person where, I will push through anything. And so I just think that that's what, we all should do. And I don't think it's until you're later in life where you kind of see the ramifications of that in your own life and in other people's lives that you start realizing like, it's probably not the best, like push your actual limit week after week after, for a long period of time. And so now I'm in a season of leadership where I would much rather evolve my schedule in 90-day increments, if you will, to make sure that I am feeding and caring for this living, breathing team organism as it should be, so that I can continue to evolve the model on an annual basis, if you will. And so that's a super like sexy thought process when it comes to, a lot of people, especially in our industry, sell this bill of goods that, you can grow and scale a practice and then, put all the players in place and just like peace out. And that has not been my experience whatsoever. And so when you're in this mature phase, I think it's really important for you to ask yourself, what is required in those 90-day increments, and do the hard work internally to just be okay with the fact that, you're not going to have team members that all stay on your team for 20 years. That's not how it's going to be. And so as you get to this mature level, you have enough different players, if you will, like different openings for positions, that there's always probably going to be one thing at least evolving. And so it's your responsibility to set your patient care hours and your, leadership hours and your training hours to fill.
Yeah, I froze there a bit. Sorry. Like there was so many brilliant things that were in there that I think you should, if you're in this season of life, go back and re-listen to what Krysti just said, because there's so many brilliant things. But the one that I want to put a pin on that I don't hear people talking about, that it's not discussed in other places or other coaching platforms or whatever, is this idea of this constant evolution, right? I wish someone would have told me at the beginning that like when I got to this stage, I didn't just get to set something and I sailed off for 20 years at it. It is constantly changing, and that's okay. Like there's going to be times when, unfortunately, a CEO gives you a notice, or sorry, the CEO, an associate gives you a notice and they're gone that you didn't see coming, right? That all of a sudden a team member's not performing, that needs to be let go, or these kind of things, that you're going to need to step back into something that you had got really good at giving away, right? That you're going to be more involved in patient care than you wanted to be for a season, right? That you're going to be less involved in, and also don't get too high if you're in one of those seasons where your team is unbelievable and you're like, I don't really need to be there. Like they're phenomenal. Like that's great. Enjoy the season. Know that it's not going to be forever, right? And the idea of it is just being okay with that, understanding it, knowing it's coming, and just being allowed to ride the waves of it a little bit and not get too high in the high and low in the lows. I wish, Krysti, that was something that people taught us or told us more back in the day. That's just like, this is going to be a constant evolution. It's going to be a constant living, breathing organism. And that like, you're going to constantly have to kind of ebb and flow with it. And I think it would have set me up a lot better to know that like, I'm not a failure. I'm not screwing something up. I'm not the worst, CEO ever, to just know that like this stuff changes and evolves.
And honestly, when you can get to the point where you have accepted it enough that you almost welcome it, obviously anytime there's a team dynamic that shifts, in most cases, there's always going to be at least a short period of time where you're like, there's dread, right? Oh gosh,
Yeah.
I have to be back to hiring, or I'm going to have to be back to training. And, that dread is normal. It's when I see people that are really thriving in this mature practice phase, it's the people that are like, well, that's what I'm going to do, because I know that as I step back into that and I maybe, play chess or whatever it is with the pieces that need to happen for the business at that time, there's almost always a better iteration on the opposite end. Sometimes it's painful going through whatever that is, but we can tell you from experience, traversing those time frames where there is evolution in those 90-day periods, you're going to get faster and faster at being able to identify and figuring out exactly what needs to happen, putting the right things where they need to be, and then you pouring in where you need to in order to move through that phase quickly and then come out the other side even better for it. And we can tell you in those times where we have had to step in and, maybe back to full-time adjusting or whatever it is, every single time it creates exactly what is needed for not only the practice, but also I think for you as a practitioner. This is something that's really top of mind for me because I am in the practice right now, full-time adjusting as we are working on hiring our an additional doc at our practice. And literally just yesterday, I was driving home and I was thinking about all the moments that I had with patients throughout that day that I was like, I would be missing all of this if it wasn't for exactly what needed to happen for the practice. Like, this is what I needed as a practitioner right now. I can sit knee to knee with a patient who was just diagnosed with breast cancer, and we sent her flowers, and she's in tears because she's been seeing me for a decade, and she's just so thankful that our team thinks of her that way. This is like family. And so, that's just one of many moments that happen over the last few days that oftentimes when you get to the CEO level, you need a shot of that. You need to have some opportunities to get back in and have that happen. And so please just don't assign, going back to what Jake said, don't assign labels to yourself if this is happening. If this is happening to you, it's 100% normal and it's actually healthy. And that just means that your business is in this mature phase. There's enough different positions where there's always going to be some evolution. And so when it comes to setting your adjusting hours, you have to get really clear on what's needed for the whole team at that time and what's needed for the growth trajectory of the business at that time so that you don't create stagnation if you're on a really good growth trend and you have an opportunity as a provider to feed that.
So good. And I don't think I have anything else to add to this section or this part. The one thing that I have to highlight that you said, Krysti, which is so true, is that whenever this transition happens, especially if you didn't want it, right, there's going to be a grief period. There's going to be a period of like, oh, right? But the quicker that you can make that refractory period, the quicker you can get through it to be like, okay, what is the joy in this? What am I gaining all of this, right? And when it's happened to me, Krysti, same thing. It was like, I am seeing more patient experiences than I had before. I am uncovering things at the office, inefficiencies, little things that have crept in that I hadn't seen when I wasn't involved in it as much. So take that grief period and grieve. Like grieve. I didn't want this to happen. This sucks, right? But make it an hour, right? And then move on rather than a month, because the shorter you can make that period and the quicker you can get back to the joy of it, the more your practice isn't going to stumble. It's just going to be there and you can like uncover and identify and just have a lot of things that you find joy in it.
So that's what we have for you today. Hopefully some great things you can ruminate on and just think about where you are in those 3 phases and what needs to happen. But bottom line, I'm sure you heard there's so much customization and personalization that needs to happen. And so this is really where a coach comes in. We can't tell you enough. We've always had coaches in our lives, both of us. We are so adamant about just having that right thought process around you so that you can move quickly, because speed in business matters. It really does matter. And so, just going back to what Jake said, a coaching is really what's going to help you shorten that refractory period and move through and figure out how to make the right next steps happen. So definitely, if you don't have someone in your life that is doing that for you, make sure that you spend some time looking for that. Obviously, we would love to chat with you on that. So shoot us a message if you have something you're working through. But we will see you on the next episode of Pull Up a Chair. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pull Up a Chair show.
Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the show on your favorite platform, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.
If you found value in today's episode, please share it with a colleague. We would be honored.
To connect with us, you can find us on IG at The Pursuit Kairos, or you can email us at connect@thepursuitkairos.com.